Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 15th episode of the $1 Million Ideas podcast. In our quest to find a different variation, one which resonates more with our target audience and is more engaging, today's episode is going to be another special one. In this episode, Ken and I are going to be discussing influencer-driven strategies of how brands are being created and launched today. The whole idea of making your business and then trying to figure out marketing and distribution are getting left behind, and there is a new, better way as to how to do this. And in today's episode, that is what Ken and I are going to discuss. And so with that, hi Ken, how's it going? How's life?
Hey, good. Just life is good.
When I think about life being good, and especially as we come near the end of the year, it's like when you look back, there's like a lot of stuff that's happened during the course of the year. And yeah, I feel like 2024 was a great year. We sort of like launched this podcast. We started a few things together. And yeah, it's been a good ride, but one which took a lot of iterations and experiments to get to where we are today. And I think people give up a lot easier, and then probably life doesn't become so good when you start a lot of things, stop them, and just don't give it your all.
And I'm American, so I'm really excited by kind of this new regime that's coming in. You know, nobody's perfect, but I like kind of sort of this fresh approach. But I was talking about this with a friend a little while ago about how I was born in 1977, raised through the 80s and the 90s. And at that time in America, if you were smart, like there was so much opportunity. You know, the question was not, can I get a good job, but rather like, which good job am I going to accept? And I think that mindset's disappeared, you know, like so many good, smart people. I was just talking to this guy, PhD data scientist with Google and whatnot. And he's living in San Francisco. And he's telling me how he can't get a job for a while now. And I'm just like, wow, like this guy is super smart, talented, great resume. He's like telling me like how he's been unemployed for a while. And then it just tells you, I think something's got to change. And I feel like maybe change is on the horizon.
Yeah, I think so too. I think like, yeah, now that you bring it up, like the regime change for sure. I think it's generally very favorable towards our sector as well, which is technology M&A, and generally things to do with that sort of like nature. So yeah, I'm excited to see what happens. Markets are already responding extremely well to the news. So with this change happening, lots of people are like, okay, I want to get started. I want to start my own business in 2025. And the traditional way that both of us have also done stuff is like, okay, cool. We figure out like, what's the problem in the marketplace? How big is it? And then we've got to validate this problem, right? And then we figure out a product, we take it to a few clients, we sort of like validate this. And ultimately for every project, there'll come a time where it'll be like, okay, it sort of like works on these 2 or 3 customers. Now, how do we get the next 20 or 30 of them? And that's where entrepreneurs, which are just like solution oriented first, then I have to switch to this marketing mindset. At least that's what it was for me. Like I would always be like, let's get the product experience right and things like that. But lately we've been seeing that, you know, maybe we've got it wrong or markets have changed because distribution has become so important these days that you could have the best product, the best service, but if you can't figure out a scalable distribution strategy, someone's going to beat you with a far less sophisticated product or service with a better distribution thing. So are you seeing similar things in your work and around the projects that you're working with?
Yeah, for sure. And I think one special insight, you know, I do this hobby, it's a side business. It's related to my dental passion. But you see, like, if you have a business that's related to something that someone is really kind of deeply passionate about, that business is going to have a certain level of stickiness that is very hard to compete with because you have a personality people get to know, and that just compounds faster. Like, there's more relevant content and blah, blah, blah. And then so when you see businesses that don't have that, right, and are just trying to do paid ads and like bland kind of content, you just realize that you're fighting with a blunt sword when you do that. That's something I'm noticing. And and some people, even though it's a blunt sword, like they've created decent businesses. But I just wonder, like, if you were to sharpen the sword, like what could you do? And that's what I think is interesting about this opportunity.
Yeah, I think that'll be a fun one to share maybe later down the road with people, but I think it's a really good one. I think at the crux of it is that publicly there has been a massive decline of trust in the world. And so, pretty much the whole D2C, we talked about aggregators last episode. And if you haven't checked out that episode, you should. It was basically find a product that's doing well, connect it with a supplier over here, run these sort of like Facebook or Amazon ads, and then print money. While that worked for a while, that model has its own challenges, and I would recommend you watching the episode for that. But what happened was that what you said went missing, right? There was no trust. Basically, it was a fancy logo, a box, and then a lot of people were left with subpar experiences with most things that they were buying. And now the switch is happening because then social media gave the rise. TikTok came out, like short videos became really big. And that led to the rise of the likes of Mr. Beast. But other than Mr. Beast, what we're going to talk about over here is that there's a segment that has greatly increased, which are these micro influencers or deep niched influencers that are creating content for their small business or for a hobby that is a massively untapped distribution strategy right now as well, right? Like, you've seen this as well as I, and you've probably done more work in this with influencers and things than I have.
Yeah, I think it's, in certain niches, it's really blowing up. I think other niches haven't experienced that yet. So I think that's part of where, like in certain niches, you would already be very hard to compete because people are doing it. But I think you trickle down into all those other niches that are maybe boring is where I think a lot of opportunity is still.
And so in this episode, we're going to use an example to make it more tangible for everyone to learn from this. And so in this episode, we're going to be talking about Solar Lily. And this is a TikTok influencer, one that we found. And she has a really interesting page, which has a rabid sort of like following because of the space that she's in, which is solar. And Ken, you've worked with a bunch of solar companies as well, so you understand the space. Like, what's the problem from the business angle first? Like, suppose that I'm selling solar services right now. It seems to be relatively commoditized of selling panels with a markup installation. What could those businesses tack on that would make this very different from all the other people doing it?
So I have a client that I've been working with for a while now that is in solar in Southeast Asia, and they're taking a more of a tech approach, but there's a lot of kind of old school companies that compete against them. And for now, they're not that differentiated in that what do companies in this space do? They typically run Facebook ads because it's the best place to get customers for this specific country. And then they start calling those people they fill out the lead form, and then eventually, they pitch them and they close them, and then they do an installation of solar on their residential. This is residential solar. And so everybody's got these relatively personality-less, content and ads, and they're spending a decent amount on paid ads and on the sales team. But I think what it lacks is that personality, and that I think it would just take the trust to a different level and really unify the messaging around like, okay, this is the person that represents the company and their personality, and this is how they think about things. And I think it lacks that. Like, you're just kind of this bland company. And if you're a bland company, there's 10 of them. So it's commoditized as to which one I choose.
So I think important context over here that we should get started with, like, is lots of industries, especially in these sort of like where commoditization has happened, where there has been massive margin compression because of the number of entrants, even the low sort of like barrier to entry to get in is definitely a problem. So all of these businesses have this problem. They go at it the other way. So how does someone like Solar Lily come into the picture? Like, when you saw her page and given the work that you've done in the thing, like, what attracted you to the page other than her massively growing audience and things like that?
I came upon her because I was looking for a creator to kind of join forces with for this client, and I wanted to pitch someone. And so I started just doing like text searches on TikTok. And I was surprised, like, she was the only one creating content that I would have wanted to represent the company, because she was doing this more educational forum and hitting different nuances. And, she was very clearly like technical, doing this stuff herself on a roof and blah, blah, blah. And she didn't even speak English. Like, I don't even know what language she was speaking, but like, I just looked at it and I was like, oh, wow, she's doing what I would like to have. So that was the thing, is that I could just tell if I had watched a lot of her content, like, I would get more credibility, I'd get more educated on the topic, and eventually I'd be willing to buy. And I think that's powerful.
Yeah, I think like with this example, for a lot of people looking like, Ken has this service that he's offering, and then he started to look for one of these influencers. You could do the manual searches and get it going, or you could use tools like Channel Crawler or Collaborator, and there are a bunch of other tools that we can link to that will at least help you with trying to figure out like who are these creators and influencers, which one of them have already started thinking about monetizing their channel in a certain way so that they're open for inquiries. Because I think a lot of these people just start off as a way to either just promote themselves with not really an idea that I'm going to monetize this, because even if you look at her page right now, she hasn't sort of like optimized it at all for that. I didn't see any sort of like ad placements, or she wasn't really pitching her services that much. She was basically, like you were saying, establishing credibility that here are the things that, you're going to face problems with if you're installing these panels, and here's how to get over it. And I think it's such a powerful fact that anyone with a mobile phone, so there's no major editing happening over here. She's just sort of like doing the videos. And like you said, several niches like this. I know in gardening and golf and lots of other places I've seen these influencers rise up where they're just doing it to document their own credibility. And it's like a fun thing to do on the side because they're doing so many of these in a day that, it just creates this thing. So you saw this and then you see opportunity. So where's the opportunity for someone who's like, let's say that, I wanted to start a service which is also, I don't know, putting smart switches in houses, for example. Like lots of people want to save electricity, want to do stuff like this. Like you think smart switches, which I unfortunately have gone through the thing. There's like the whole, like, do I go with the Google system, the Apple system, the Amazon system? Like, how do I do this? And there are lots of things. Like, okay, so I decide like this is the thing. Now, instead of going really deep, what we're suggesting is that the other alternative is to find an influencer who really already understands this space really well and may not be as big yet. And you're trying to get them to partner up with you, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a couple models you can use. It was interesting. I was having the same conversation with a prop tech founder, VC funded. I think they raised 7 or 8 million, and they've just done the kind of paid ads, like generic approach. And if you look at their TikTok, it's like a mess of different things. Sometimes catered more towards recruiting, sometimes more towards customers. But the idea was like, how do we get a creator that represents his business and becomes that personality that becomes sticky over time? And do you choose someone that's like an employee, and then like you do the editing, you tell them what topics to hit, or do you try to find someone that's out there? And so I was just like, I was browsing, like, is there someone out there? And I didn't really find someone. But I think this is where it's an interesting business, is you come to these type of companies like this prop tech or this solar company, and you say, listen, I'm going to find this creator. I'm going to create a creator for you. And I'm going to do all the video editing. I'm going to align on the topics. And this person is going to kind of like more of a soft, they're not going to be branded. And then they just build an audience with your, like with support, and they fund it. And, you as the agency make a little bit of margin, but then like you get some maybe equity or something like this, or a rev share.
That's a really, like, from an agency model for someone who wants to do that. I think like if you have connections, if you understand like the industry and things like that, and I don't think it takes that much, right? It takes a lot of hard work to find these people, to DM them. They're running tangential channels which may not have exploded, so you're trying to do the whole deal. And again, this is one of those businesses that doesn't take any money to get started. Essentially, you are solving a matching problem. We mentioned a couple of tools to find these influencers at the start of this, but those tools will find people who are already at the point where they have started to be monetizing their channel in some way or the other. So for someone starting this business to provide creators, there's still so many creators who are creating great content and are just at the earliest stages. So that would be a great one. Like you go to the solar firm, you say like, okay, here's the creator. We'll produce X amount of videos for you. And this creator will do this and will produce everything. The video costs this much. And like you said, you share between the creator and yourself. And that's the agency model. The other model, like with Solar Lily, could be that she already has the channel in place right now. And I have a e-commerce beauty company out of Vietnam, and we've done this. So we sell a lot of these gua sha and beauty sort of like products. And there was this influencer who was doing face oils and stuff like that, which was really big, but she wasn't using anything else. And we approached her to do a cross with our brand as well, where she would then sell the gua shas on her side, and we would then promote the face oils on their side. And it was a very simple revenue swap that we set up. And I think like the best agreements with these influencers at the beginning are extremely simple. They're not complicated contracts that you got to set up, because both of you need to get comfortable working with each other, seeing whether they're comfortable with that. And someone who hasn't done any ad placement right now has to run a very fine line between not being a sellout, because if she's got hundreds of thousands of followers through this very organic view, her audience is also very sensitive to as soon as they see some placement coming in. So any placement that comes in has to be done strategically. And I've seen that in my own experience that, you've got to structure these things very simply at the beginning, make it very favorable for the creator, because the person who needs to make the biggest jump is them, because they have the loyalty of their audience that they've got to take care of before anything else. They spent a lot of time building it up. And yeah, any other sort of like red flags or things that you've seen, Ken, when talking to creators or things like that, have held them back, or bad experiences generally?
I had this experience when I was helping this old NFT client, and I spent quite a bit of time writing out to YouTube and TikTok creators that had some followings. And it was very expensive, and they were very they kept saying like what their rules were and what they would and wouldn't do. And they didn't even have very big followings. And then I started hiring essentially up workers and trying to create creators out of them. And I did that with at least 10 people in that client. And then with this solar company, I've done it with a bunch of people, and we found one girl. But I find it so much easier if they're not that big. It's easier to just create your own creator and treat them as an employee. Right. And a lot of times they're not that expensive, and you test to see who's good on camera. Maybe they, hopefully they have some interest in the category already, and they do their own research. My red flag is, if someone's going to be a pain in the ass, don't work with them. It's not that. If you do all the editing for someone and they have you have a decent financial amount to push the channel a little bit, I think you can create these niche creators pretty quickly and easily. And that's what I also like as the agency model, is that I want a business that compounds. Like pure agency, I'm just making, a service fee. That's not interesting. So I would do it if I was an agency, I would want to own the channels I'm creating. So I'm essentially providing them these creators that I create in-house. I'm owning the TikTok and YouTube channels that I'm creating. And then they're essentially covering my costs. And my upside is if these things blow up, then I'm doing rev share or equity or something. And then if they ever try to you have a lot of leverage then, because you own the creative assets that are driving them customers. And that is that for me is just putting money into a fund and just having it compound.
I think a couple of key points over there that you brought up. First thing is probably a golden rule for most early engagements or partnership deals that you're doing with someone. So if someone very early makes it very complicated to work together, I've also seen the same things, regardless whether we're getting an influencer to work together or someone else. It's generally that friction that creates usually permutates in different parts of the relationship later on. And so I think that's a key red flag. Whether you're starting a business, finding a co-founder, finding a new employee, contractor, whatever you're doing, it shouldn't be hard at the beginning, because you're trying to establish a working arrangement between two people, and one which is win-win. And it's always when you structure most things in win lose or win don't care sort of like way that things sort of like start to break down. The second part that you said is like, for sure, the two business models that we're really talking about over here. One is the agency model that Ken articulated over here, which he did with his thing. If you can't find the creator, you still have like a business, then you can sort of like do the hard work of trying to figure out who these early creators are, or hire them, or interview people and build your confidence around them. The benefit I see of this is that most of the IP that is created is usually all of yours. Like everything that is created belongs to your company. You've paid for it and things like that. And then you can figure out what you want to do with the transfer of the IP. The challenge I faced with the alternative method that we talked about earlier was that we find an influencer who's already creating their own videos and stuff like that. Whenever I ask permission for taking one of their videos and then putting them into a UGC ad or something like that, it becomes a little complicated because essentially, while they may have mentioned my brand, unless you specifically write it in the contract that, you know, we can use the videos that you use our brand in as UGC ads, which is something that I didn't do in one of my deals earlier. They're a bit of a pain about like running their page as ads or something like that, because then again, it's that dilution that they're scared about, like, you know, when you're running their page as ads, and they need that upside as well and blah, blah, blah. So I think those were really good points that we brought up. And coming to the conclusion of this, I think distribution is becoming more and more important in the world today. It was always important, I felt. But I think what's happening, especially in this age of like AI that we're living in, where anyone can spin up a product, where anyone can spin up virtual influencers to sort of like do stuff, and the cost of production has massively gone down across the board, which means the amount of supply has massively increased. So that increases the noise in the marketplace, and you need to figure out a way how to stand out. And I think like that's basically what I'm seeing. Like it's becoming far more difficult to reach that customer now because they're just bombarded left, right.
I think they're bombarded and it's harder for sure. But what I like I had a specific example where I found this one creator that was doing in the solar space in Southeast Asia. They had a pretty good following and they had a good content creation style, right? I wrote to them, they didn't respond. But I immediately remembered this lesson I had from this Amazon coach. So there's this Amazon coach. His name's Tomer Rabinovich. He coaches 7 and 8 digit sales, Amazon sellers. And he told this metaphor that I always remember, and he applies it to Amazon. But it's like, where would you put like a new lighting shop? Would you put it? And he was referring to like New York or something. But there was like there's like the lighting shop district where there's like 20 lighting shops. Or would you put it, you know, somewhere where there's no lighting shop, right? And like a lot of business owners would immediately say, "Oh, put it where there's no other lighting shop." And his point was like, no, like as long as, you know, more customers are coming to the latest lighting shops that have opened on that block, that means things are still growing. There's still opportunity. And even if you just copy and put another lighting shop, but like make sure you try to do everything better than everybody else. So like photo, so he in Amazon space, you put better images, videos, reviews, you try to beat them eventually on every single aspect. And then you can be a very big business. And I think not many people apply this to content, especially in Southeast Asia, right? So if someone has this unique, good concept in solar and is not that expensive to generate, and it's not that much based on their personality, copy the format, make it better. And there's probably more of an audience to watch that content. So that's kind of the mindset that I like going in here is like, hey, I'm not going to like pay a ton of money for you because if I copy you and put in my own twist, like I'll probably achieve something decent.
I think like the light up analogy is really powerful one. Like it's like go where the customer is already going. There's already context, like people are already there, which I think we could do a whole separate episode on this. I've seen the trend of directories. Like if you want to build something, like you build a directory on the web of, let's say, solar TikTok influencers. I know it's very niche and things like that, but the whole deal is like if you build that directory as well, you get a whole bunch of people coming. So similar to your example, like not being too tangential and not fighting the trend as to where people are doing discovery, but then trying to figure out how you can basically stand out a lot better is basically going to be the key part, because I think like if you can clearly display competence and stuff like that, which these influencers who are good and go really deep can do, then the person who is treating this as a D2C dropshipping thing is not going to be able to compete against that person. And then, you just win out at the end of it there. Cool, man. So this was like a different episode again. So in this episode, we're calling it like, we ended with, potentially talking about directories in the future. But the whole deal with this format is that we're bringing different sort of like strategies that we're seeing working in the world today. And for anyone who's looking to start a business, running a business, wants to scale that business, hopefully it may trigger some thoughts or things like, maybe I should check this out for my business or things like that. So that's the hope. If you enjoyed this episode and things like that, I would really like it that if you would leave us a comment or send us some feedback as to whether you liked it. But the best way that you could do that is by subscribing and hitting that like button. That would help us a lot. And so with that, Ken, like anything that you want to leave the audience with or any last thoughts?
No, I think my big takeaway from this episode is it is very difficult to compete against a passionate person's personality, especially when it applies to a certain business niche. And so that is the thing that I always think about, when you're in any business, is like, who's the passionate personality that is going to create a community and people are going to associate this business and have trust for it because of this personality.
That's a great sort of like things, because I think like you could be the highest performer and stuff like that. But regardless, I think like what you're coming to is like obsession. Like when I was watching a very tangential video on this guy called Druckenmiller, who's like one of the best investors of all time. And the question was asked to him that what advice would you give to someone? Like this guy's never had a down year in 40 years. So he would be like, if you're not obsessed with this place of finding undervalued equities and things like that, like you're not going to make it in this world, because there are so many people that are obsessed with this. And those people always win out at the end of the day. So I think that's a great sort of like place to leave the episode, that find what you're obsessed about and then go deep. And usually lots of things become easier once you're able to find that for yourself. All right, thanks. See everyone next week. See you later. Bye.